In the spring of 1853, a wagon train of 200 people crossed 800 miles of waterless country from Missouri to the Oregon Territory. No pumps, no filters, no treatment tablets. Not one person died of thirst. Their scout, a trapper named Caleb Dorn, knew 23 ways to find, move, clean, and store water without a single mechanical part. Today, the average American cannot collect clean drinking water from their own roof without violating a state ordinance. We call that civilization. Caleb called it something else. My name is Levi Blackwood. I am 54 years old, 6th generation on Blackwood Hollow in the southern Appalachians. My people came up out of the Carolinas in the 1790s and never once looked back down the mountain. My grandfather Amos kept a leather journal from 1931 until the weak arthritis took his writing hand, and near everything I'm about to walk you through, he copied into it in pencil so sharp you could still smell the cedar shavings 50 years later. He made me swear it would not die with him. This is me keeping that promise. Now, I want to be straight with you before we count down. Water is the one thing that sits underneath every other skill on this channel. You can go 3 weeks without food. You go 3 days without water and the argument is over. The pioneers knew that. The trappers knew that. The homestead women who kept families alive through drought summers in Kansas and Montana and the high desert of New Mexico, they knew it in their bones. And every single system they built to solve it, somebody eventually found a way to sell you a plastic version of and then pass an ordinance making the original illegal in 14 states. Not a conspiracy, neighbor. Just how markets work. Nobody sits in a boardroom and says, let us make sure the farmers forget how to bore a well. They just make the plastic pump so cheap and the permit process so complicated that the old knowledge gets quietly embarrassing, and then one generation grows up without it, and then two. And then the knowledge is in a museum behind glass and a water bill shows up in your mailbox every month for the rest of your life. 25 systems counted down. Some of them you can build this weekend. Some of them a county inspector would drive out and make you dismantle before it dried. And number 9, the ram pump, runs water uphill to a storage tank on nothing but the weight of water falling downhill. 0 electricity, 0 fuel, and has been doing it since 1810. When you hear how simple it is, you are going to be genuinely angry that nobody told you sooner. 25 to 1. The question is not what we lost. The question is who got rich when you forgot. Number 25. The Driven Point Well. Picture a homesteader in Nebraska in 1882. He has got a steel pipe no bigger around than your wrist, a pointed iron cap screwed on the bottom with holes drilled through it, and a maul. He drives that pipe straight into the ground with nothing but arm and gravity. 10 feet, 15, 20, until the point sits below the water table. Screws a hand pump on top. Done. Clean groundwater in under a morning with $40 of hardware. The Driven Point Well never required a permit until municipal water line expansion codes in the 1960s started requiring hookup where lines ran past your property. The physics never changed. You can still buy the point cap at a farm supply store. The knowledge that tells you how deep to drive it and how to read your soil for the right spot, that is what left. Number 24. The Spring Box. A Kentucky farmer in 1910 did not dig a well if he had a hillside spring. He dug a small stone box, maybe 2 feet by 2 feet, right at the point where the water seeped out of the ground, lined it with flat fieldstone, covered it with a fitted stone lid, and ran a wooden pipe out the downhill side. The box protected the source from surface runoff, animal waste, and leaf debris. Water stayed cold, clean, and gravity-fed to the house below. The University of Kentucky Agricultural Extension published guidance on spring box construction as recently as 2009. Not ancient history. 2009. General Electric did not outlaw the spring box. They just made the refrigerator look so modern that a stone box in the hillside started to feel like something a poor man used. Number 23. The spring house pipe. Now, you take the spring box and you run a hollowed log downhill to a stone spring house, and you have the whole cold storage and water delivery system your great-grandmother used every single day of her married life. The pipe was not iron. It was a tulip poplar log, bored through the center with a long auger, sections joined with tapered fittings sealed with pine pitch. It never corroded. It never burst in a hard freeze because the wood flexed. The Romans built aqueducts. Your great-grandmother built the same principle out of what grew behind the cabin. When cast iron pipe became cheap in the 1880s, the wooden pipe looked primitive. It was not primitive. It was free. Number 22. The rain barrel chain. This one is so simple it almost embarrasses me to count it, but I am counting it because in Colorado it was technically illegal to collect rainwater off your own roof until 2009, and in Utah until 2010, and the reason, I want you to sit with this. The reason was that downstream irrigation districts held legal rights to that precipitation before it hit your shingles. Your roof, their rain. That is where we got to. A chain of wooden barrels linked by gravity-fed pipes. First barrel at the downspout. Overflow to the second. Overflow to the third. Buried in shade to stay cool. 1,000 square feet of roof and 30 inches of rain country delivers 18,000 gallons a year. Free. The Environmental Protection Agency confirmed it. The irrigation lobby spent 40 years making sure you did not do it anyway. Number 21. The roof cistern. Bigger version of the same idea. A stone or brick lined underground tank. Sometimes 8 feet deep, 10 feet across, buried under the yard or the cellar floor. The whole roof drains into it through wooden gutters. A hand pump in the kitchen draws from the bottom where the water is coldest and clearest. New England farmhouses from the 1700s through the early 1900s ran on these. The United States Department of Agriculture Farmers Bulletin from 1917 gives exact construction dimensions. By 1955, municipal water lines had reached enough of rural America that the cistern got abandoned, the hand pump got pulled, and the tank got filled with dirt. People are digging them back out now. Turns out a buried stone tank full of rainwater is not primitive. It is free. Number 20. The sand and gravel filter barrel. A frontier woman in 1840 does not boil every drop of water she uses. She does not have the fuel for it. What she has is a wooden barrel with a hole bored near the bottom, layered from the top down with coarse gravel, then fine gravel, then clean river sand, then a layer of grass or cloth to keep the sand from washing through. Turbid, silty creek water goes in the top. Clear water comes out the bottom. This is slow sand filtration, and it is the same principle that every municipal water treatment plant in the country was built on after 1829, when James Simpson built the first large-scale version in London. Your great-grandmother had a barrel version in her yard. You pay a city utility to run the industrial version. Same physics, 190 years, and the barrel costs $4. Number 19. The charcoal filter column. Now you take that sand filter and you add a layer of crushed hardwood charcoal between the sand and the gravel. And you have a system that pulls out not just sediment, but odor, taste, and a significant portion of chemical contamination. The Cherokee and the Haudenosaunee both used wood ash and charcoal for water cleaning long before European contact. Amos wrote this one up in 1947. He called it the sweetening column because the water that came through it tasted like nothing, which is what good water is supposed to taste like. A modern countertop charcoal filter from a brand I will not name runs $65 and needs a cartridge every 3 months. A clay pot packed with crushed hardwood charcoal runs you the price of the clay pot. The charcoal you make yourself from last winter's oak splits. Zero recurring cost. Forever. Number 18. The settling barrel. Before the filter, before the charcoal, before any of it, you let the water sit. A simple wooden barrel, water poured in and left alone for 24 hours. Heavy sediment, silt, and a portion of biological material drop to the bottom. You draw from the middle spigot, not the bottom, not the top. That is it. That is the whole trick. Pioneer families called it resting the water. The science is called sedimentation, and it is step one in every municipal treatment plant on the continent. They just do it in a concrete tank the size of a football field. You can do it in a $40 barrel on your back porch. And I know that sounds too simple. It is too simple. That is exactly why nobody sells it to you. Number 17. The solar still. A man stranded in the Sonoran Desert in 1942 with nothing but a sheet of canvas and a tin cup is not going to die of thirst if he knows this. Dig a bowl in the earth 2 feet across and 1 foot deep. Place the tin cup in the center. Lay the canvas over the bowl, seal the edges with dirt, and place a small stone in the center of the canvas directly above the cup. The sun heats the ground, moisture evaporates, condenses on the underside of the canvas, runs to the low point and drips into the cup. The United States Army Survival Manual has taught this since at least 1957. It is slow. It is not going to water your garden, but it will keep a man alive in country with no surface water at all. The knowledge is free. The canvas is $4 at any hardware store. Number 16. The transpiration bag. This one Amos called the lazy man's water, and he meant it as a compliment. Tie a clear plastic bag, or in the old days a treated canvas bag, tightly around a leafy tree branch in full sun. The leaves transpire, breathing out moisture all day the way leaves do. By afternoon, you have a quarter cup of clean water condensed on the inside of the bag. 1 bag, 1 branch, 1 afternoon. Now scale that. 10 bags on 10 branches. That is real water in a survival situation from nothing but leaves and sunlight. The Army teaches it. The Boy Scouts taught it before they cut the outdoor curriculum in 2014, which, and I say this as a man who earned his eagle, was a decision made by people who had clearly never been genuinely thirsty. Number 15. The dew cloth. In the high desert of the American Southwest and in the dry grasslands of the Great Plains, indigenous peoples and early settlers both used large pieces of absorbent cloth, sometimes animal hides, spread flat on the ground or draped over brush before dawn. By sunrise, the cloth was wet with dew. Wring it into a container. Repeat. A family in the Llano Estacado in 1875 collected enough morning dew off a spread of wool blankets to water a small kitchen garden through a dry week. Nobody patented the blanket. Nobody needed to. The water company just needed you to forget the blanket existed. Number 14. The hillside seep tap. A seep is where groundwater bleeds through a hillside below the water table line. Not a full spring, just a wet patch of earth that never quite dries out. An 1890 homesteader in the Ozarks would drive a length of split bamboo or a hollowed elder branch horizontally into that seep, 2 feet in, angle it slightly downward, and let the water weep out the end into a stone-lined catch basin below. Slow, maybe a gallon an hour. But a gallon an hour is 24 gallons a day, and 24 gallons a day is a family's drinking water, plus the kitchen garden, plus the chickens. Modern well drilling codes in many counties now require permits for any groundwater collection structure, including seep taps. The seep still bleeds. The permit costs $300. Number 13. The rock pool trap. In limestone country, and there is a lot of limestone country in this nation, rainwater collects in natural depressions in exposed rock faces. The pioneers called them tinajitas, the Spanish word for little jars, and they mapped them the way a modern driver maps gas stations. A trapper crossing the Edwards Plateau in 1860 knew exactly which rock faces held water after a rain and how long each one stayed full. He would line the natural depression with clay to slow evaporation, cover it with a flat stone to keep animals and debris out, and mark the location with a cairn. Nobody taught this in school after 1930 because the highway ran past a filling station, and a filling station had cold water, and nobody needed to know where the limestone puddles were anymore. The limestone puddles are still there. Number 12. The Willow Finder Method. I want to be careful here because there is a lot of folklore wrapped around this one, and I am not a folklore channel. What I will tell you is what the United States Geological Survey actually documents. Certain water-loving plants, willow, cottonwood, cattail, elderberry, and river birch, do not grow randomly. They grow where their roots can reach water, which means within striking distance of the water table. A trapper in the 1830s crossing dry country did not wander blind. He read the tree line. A line of cottonwoods in flat country almost always marks a watercourse, dry or wet. Willows in a draw mean the water table is within 15 feet of the surface. That is not mysticism. That is botany. And it is the kind of knowledge that kept Caleb Dorn's wagon train alive when there was not a stream in sight for 4 days. Number 11. The underground clay pipe run. Roman aqueducts get all the glory. Your great-grandmother's cousin in rural Virginia in 1905 gets none. He ran water from a hillside spring to his farmhouse through 200 feet of fired clay pipe, buried below the frost line, gravity-fed, 0 moving parts. The pipe sections were made at a local pottery, tapered male and female ends sealed with hydraulic lime mortar. The system ran for 60 years without a repair. When PVC pipe became cheap after 1950, the clay pipe looked antiquated. Nobody teaches pottery pipe fitting anymore. But clay does not corrode, does not leach chemicals, and does not require a factory in New Jersey to replace a section of it. The earth around you has everything it needs. It always did. Number 10. The Wooden Pipe Aqueduct. Bore City, California. 1858. Miners needed water for hydraulic operations 8 miles from the nearest creek. They built a wooden flume, split logs hollowed and joined, running 8 miles across the Sierra Nevada foothills on wooden trestles, dropping elevation the whole way, delivering thousands of gallons a day on nothing but gravity. The engineering was not complicated, the labor was. What built it was the understanding that water moves downhill, and if you give it a channel, it will move downhill for as long as you want it to, forever, free. The Army Corps of Engineers eventually built concrete and steel. The mining companies eventually ran electric pumps. And the knowledge of how to move serious water volume without either of those things got quietly filed under history. Number 9. The ram pump. This one right here is the one that is going to bother you when you understand it. A hydraulic ram pump uses the energy of a large volume of water, falling a short distance, to push a small volume of water up a very long distance. No electricity, no fuel, no motor. Moving parts you can count on one hand. It was invented in France in 1796. American farmers were running them by 1810. A creek that drops 4 feet over 100 feet of run can push clean water uphill to a storage tank 50 feet above the creek, a quarter mile away. All day, every day, indefinitely. The pump costs under $200 to build from hardware store parts. Plans are public domain. The United States Department of Agriculture published installation guidance in 1926. Municipal water utilities expanded through the 1940s and 1950s, and the ram pump went from a working farm tool to a curiosity. Friend, there are farms in this county right now with gravity-fed creeks who are paying a water bill. That is not on them. Nobody told them. There was no money in telling them. Number 8. The wind-driven paddle wheel lift. Before the steel windmill, before air motor put their first tower up in 1888, there was the paddle wheel. A wooden wheel set horizontally over a stream, paddles catching the current, connected by a simple crank and rod to a reciprocating pump that lifted water into an elevated trough or tank above. Wind versions existed too, simpler than a windmill. A vaned wheel on a horizontal axle turning a screw pump or a chain of buckets. Colonial mills used them. Early frontier farms used them. Then the air motor steel windmill came along, and the wooden paddle wheel looked like something a child built. The steel windmill was better, I will give them that. But it cost money and required a catalog order and a man who knew how to set a tower. The wooden paddle wheel cost the wood behind your barn and an afternoon. Sometimes simpler is not worse. Sometimes simpler is just less profitable to sell. Number 7. The gravity-fed tank system. An elevated wooden tank, 20 to 30 feet above the house on a timber frame, fed by a spring or cistern uphill, plumbed by wooden or clay pipe into the kitchen, the trough, the garden. Constant pressure, constant flow, zero pumping after initial fill. Gravity-fed tank systems ran ranches and homesteads across the American West from the 1860s onward. The Fred Harvey Company, which ran the railroad hotels across the Southwest, used gravity tanks at remote stations into the 1920s. When electric submersible pumps arrived in the 1940s, the elevated tank looked like a problem solved. It was not a problem. It was the solution. Somebody just found a way to sell you a motor to replace it. Number 6. The buried clay pot irrigation well. This one is 4,000 years old and it works better than a drip irrigation system in certain soil conditions. And I say that knowing full well someone is going to write that in the comments and argue with me about it. Fired clay pots, called ollas, buried to the neck in a garden bed, filled with water through the open top. The water seeps slowly through the porous clay walls directly into the root zone of whatever you planted around it. Zero evaporation, zero runoff, zero electricity. University of California. Cooperative Extension published a study in 2003 confirming olla. Irrigation reduces water use by up to 70% compared to surface watering. 4,000 years old. Confirmed by a university in 2003. And the irrigation supply industry would very much prefer you buy their drip tape instead. Number 5. The bog filter walk. A natural bog is one of the most effective water filtration systems that has ever existed on this planet. Sphagnum moss is naturally antimicrobial. The layers of peat below it filter sediment and biological material to a remarkable degree. Indigenous peoples across the northern tier of this continent, the Ojibwe, the Cree, the Abenaki, all understood that water moving through a healthy bog came out the other side cleaner than it went in. Early settlers in Minnesota and Wisconsin tapped the outflow of natural bogs for drinking water. Modern wetland science confirms it. The Environmental Protection Agency's own constructed wetlands guidance from 2012 describes engineered versions of this system for wastewater treatment. You already own the physics. The bog does not send a bill. The water treatment plant does. Number 4. The living willow fence water catch. A homesteader in the northern Great Plains in 1892 did not just plant willows along his creek bank because they looked nice. He planted them in a dense double row on the windward side of his water source, their roots holding the bank, their canopy slowing the wind, their leaves transpiring enough moisture to measurably raise the humidity in the microclimate around his spring. The willows were infrastructure. They were a living windbreak, a bank stabilizer, and a humidity modifier all in one, and they reproduced themselves from cuttings for free every spring. When the government started the Great Plains Shelter Belt program in 1935, they were formalizing something homesteaders had known for 50 years. The program planted 220 million trees. Then federal farm subsidies in the 1970s incentivized removing shelter belts to plant fence line to fence line. 220 million trees gone because corn paid better that year. Number 3. The deep limestone hand-bored well. I want to tell you about a man named Ezra Combs who bored a 60-foot well by hand in Powell County, Kentucky in the summer of 1871. He did it with a wooden shaft, an iron bit, and a helper who turned the shaft from above while Ezra cleared the cuttings. It took him 11 days. That well watered his family, his animals, and his kitchen garden for 43 years without a single repair. The technique, called hand augering or pole boring, was documented in the United States Department of Agriculture Farmers Bulletin 941 published in 1917. It requires no engine, no cable rig, no drilling mud. It requires patience, a good iron bit, the knowledge of your local geology, and 11 days of honest work. Modern well drilling with a hydraulic rig runs between $1,500 and $12,000 depending on depth and geology. Ezra Combs spent 11 days and the cost of an iron bit. The well is probably still there. Nobody thought to fill it in because nobody thought anyone would ever need it again. Number 2. The mountain ice cellar melt system. In the high country, water was not just found in streams and springs. It was stored all winter in snowpack and ice, and the old mountain families knew how to make that storage work for them through the dry months. A stone-lined cellar dug into the north face of a hillside, packed with ice cut from a pond in January, insulated with sawdust and straw, would hold ice through August in a good year. As that ice melted, the meltwater ran through a clay pipe to a collection cistern below. Cold, clean, gravity-fed, the whole summer. The ice house and the melt cistern together were a complete water management system for the dry season. The ice cream industry, and I am not even joking, the commercial ice industry was one of the first large-scale businesses to recognize that if they could commodify the harvesting and storage of natural ice, they could create a product people would pay for instead of cutting their own. Frederick Tudor, the Boston Ice King, was selling pond ice to the Caribbean by 1810. By 1880, a generation of Americans had been taught that buying ice was what modern people did. Cutting your own was what poor people did. The cellar is still the north face of your hill. The ice is still falling every January. Nobody is charging you for it yet. Number 1. Number 1 is not a system. The record shows Josiah Dorn living to 78 years old on 40 acres with 4 independent water sources and not 1 cent paid to any company for any of it. He was not a survivalist. He was not afraid of anything. He was just a man who understood that water is the one thing no man should have to beg permission to collect from his own sky. His grandson sold the farm in 1922. The new owners capped the well, filled the cistern, pulled the willow line, and connected to the municipal water main. The water bill arrived the following month. It has arrived every month since in that house, for 100 years. Now here's what I want you to take away from every single one of these 25 systems. None of them stopped working. The spring box still works. The charcoal filter still works. The ram pump still works. The olla still works. The bog still filters. The limestone still holds water the way it always did. Not one of these systems required an upgrade. Not one of them was replaced because something better came along. They were replaced because something more profitable came along. And profitable for whom is the question you should always be asking when a skill disappears. I am not telling you to tear out your plumbing. I am not telling you the water company is evil. I am telling you the same thing Amos told me, standing at his spring box on a cold November morning when I was 9 years old, and complaining that hiking up the hill to check the box was unnecessary when we had a tap in the kitchen. He said, "Boy, the tap works until it does not. The spring works until the mountain moves. The mountain has not moved. Pick one system this week, just one. Put a rain barrel under your downspout. Read the farmer's bulletin on spring box construction. It is free online and the Department of Agriculture has not taken it down. Find the wet patch on your hillside and understand what it is. Learn to read willow and cottonwood when you walk by water. Buy a clay pot and bury it in your garden bed and watch what happens to your water use. One system. One brick in the wall. The man who cannot be shut off does not need to fear the bill. Your great-grandfather knew all of this. Somebody just did not get the chance to hand it down. That is what I was here for tonight. Keep the old ways. They kept us.